You can't be in this area. It's restricted.
I have every right to be here.
Not without authorization. Show me your ID.
I don't have to show you anything.
Then you're coming with us. You need to come with me. Now.
Why? I haven't done anything.
Don't play games. Where is he?
I don't know who you mean.
We know you do. Let's go. Ma'am, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent.
Arrest for what? This is a mistake.
Please turn around and place your hands behind your back.
The sharp sound of ripping denim tore through the federal courthouse hallway like a gunshot. It wasn't just a jacket. It was a declaration of war. Sergeant Gage Harlan, a man they called the Hammer, stood towering over a quiet black woman, clutching the shredded sleeve of her coat in his fist and sneering as if he owned the building. He thought she was just another obstacle. He thought she was nobody. He didn't know that the woman trembling before him wasn't a victim. She was the trap. And when the bailiff called for everyone to rise, Gage Harlan would realize that he had just assaulted the one person on earth with the power to end his life. This is the story of how arrogance met absolute justice. The air conditioning in the federal courthouse was broken again, leaving the hallway thick with the scent of stale floor wax, nervous sweat, and cheap cologne. It was the kind of heavy heat that shortened tempers and wore patience thin. Moving through the crowd like a shark in shallow water was Sergeant Gage Harlan. 6'4" with a buzz cut that showed off the scar running above his right ear, Gage didn't walk. He patrolled. Even here, off-duty in civilian clothes, he wore his arrogance like a badge. He wore a tight polo shirt that strained against his biceps, the kind of man who took up 2 lanes of traffic simply because he could. "I'm telling you, it's a wash," Gage said loudly into his phone, not caring who heard. He laughed, a harsh bark that made a passing paralegal flinch. Internal affairs had nothing. The dash cam footage was corrupted. You know how it goes. Technical difficulties. He winked at a security guard who looked away uncomfortably. Gage Harlan had a reputation in the precinct. They called him the Hammer because when Gage showed up, things got broken, suspects fell downstairs, evidence disappeared, cameras malfunctioned, and throughout his career he had skated by on intimidation and the blue wall of silence. Today was supposed to be his victory lap. A federal inquiry into his unit's conduct regarding the disappearance of narcotics money was scheduled for a preliminary hearing. But Gage knew the judge. They played poker together. The original judge was an old-school hardliner who thought police brutality was just proactive policing. Gage checked his Rolex, a watch that cost 3 times his monthly salary. He was cutting it close, but kings don't rush. He turned the corner toward the courtroom, swinging wide and expecting the sea of people to part for him. Most did. One person didn't. A woman stood near the water fountain, reviewing a stack of files balanced precariously in her arms. She was black, petite, maybe in her mid-40s, wearing a nondescript, slightly oversized denim jacket over a gray blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore thick-rimmed reading glasses that slid down her nose. She looked tired. She looked ordinary. Gage, distracted by his own reflection in a window, clipped her shoulder hard. It wasn't a brush. It was a collision. The files in her arms went flying, scattering across the marble floor like white confetti. Gage stumbled a step, his ego bruised more than his body. He looked down, expecting an apology. The woman didn't apologize. She knelt immediately, scrambling to pick up the papers. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low, firm, but not aggressive. "You could watch where you're going, officer." That was the trigger, the word officer. She knew who he was, and she hadn't called him sir. Gage kicked one of the files away with the toe of his boot. "Maybe you should get out of the way, lady. You're blocking federal property." The hallway went quiet. The ambient noise of the courthouse, the murmuring lawyers, the shuffling feet, died down. People sensed violence. The woman stopped gathering papers. She looked up. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. "I am standing in a public hallway. Pick up that file." Gage laughed. It was a cruel, incredulous sound. He stepped closer, invading her space, looming over her kneeling form. "I don't pick up trash, and I don't take orders from welfare queens waiting for their public defender. Move." She stood up. She was a foot shorter than him, but she didn't step back. "I suggest you step away from me, Mr. Harlan. You are already in a precarious position today." Gage's face turned red. "You know my name? Good. Then you know what I do." He reached out, grabbing the collar of her denim jacket to shove her aside. It was a bullying move, one he had used 1,000 times on street corners. But the jacket was old. Or maybe Gage didn't know his own strength. The sound was sickeningly loud. The entire left sleeve of her jacket tore away from the shoulder seam, hanging by a few threads. The force of his shove sent her stumbling back against the wall, her head cracking lightly against the plaster. The hallway gasped. A young lawyer dropped his briefcase. Gage stood there, the piece of denim fabric still in his hand, looking at the exposed shoulder of her gray blouse. For a second he looked surprised. Then he doubled down. "Look what you made me do!" Gage sneered, tossing the fabric onto the floor. "Cheap junk. Next time, buy a suit that fits. Now get out of my face before I arrest you for assaulting an officer." The woman adjusted her glasses. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She reached up, touched the torn shoulder of her jacket, and then looked Gage Harlan dead in the eyes. "You have made a grave error in judgment, Sergeant," she said. Her voice had changed. It wasn't the voice of a tired woman in a hallway anymore. It was cold steel. "Sue me," Gage spat, stepping over her scattered files. "See how far you get." He stormed off toward the double doors of the courtroom, high-fiving his partner, Officer Reyes, who was waiting by the entrance. "What was that about?" Reyes asked, looking back at the woman who was calmly gathering her papers. "Nothing," Gage said, adjusting his tie. "Just taking out the trash." The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and high stakes. This was a high-profile suppression hearing. The allegations were that Gage's unit, the Street Crimes Task Force, had been systematically shaking down drug dealers, stealing the cash, and planting evidence to cover their tracks. But Gage wasn't worried. He sat at the defense table next to his lawyer, Attorney Preston Vail. Vail was a slippery man in an expensive suit, known for getting cops off the hook. "Where's the judge?" Gage whispered, leaning over. "On his way. He's usually on the bench by now." Vail shuffled some papers, looking slightly annoyed. There was a last-minute substitution. The original judge had a family emergency. Gage frowned. "Substitution? Who did we get?" "Unclear," Vail said. "But don't worry. The prosecution's case relies on the testimony of a junkie and a missing ledger. We're golden. Just look professional." Gage leaned back, stretching his arms over the back of the bench. He scanned the gallery. He saw the weeping mother of the kid he had framed last year. He saw the internal affairs rat, Detective Lewis, sitting in the back row. Gage locked eyes with Lewis and smirked. "You can't touch me," the smirk said. He felt invincible. He was the predator in the tank. He replayed the moment in the hallway in his mind, the satisfying sound of the jacket tearing. It felt good to assert dominance right before the hearing. It got his blood pumping. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed through the room. The rustling of clothes filled the air as 200 people stood up. The side door behind the bench opened. Gage buttoned his suit jacket, puffing out his chest. He prepared to give the judge his best humble public servant nod, but the figure that emerged from the chambers wasn't the elderly, stooped figure of the original judge. It was a woman. She moved with a terrifying grace, her black judicial robes flowing around her like storm clouds. She didn't look at the gallery. She walked straight to the high-backed leather chair, placed a stack of files on the bench, and stood there for a moment, surveying the room. Gage blinked. There was something familiar about the way she held her head, something familiar about the set of her jaw. She looked down at the defense table. "Be seated," she said. The voice. Gage's stomach dropped. It felt like he had swallowed a stone. He knew that voice. He had heard it moments earlier. "You have made a grave error in judgment, Sergeant." He squinted. The judge wasn't wearing the reading glasses now, and she was wearing the robe, which hid her clothes. But as she sat down, she reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. She slid them onto her nose. Then she looked directly at Gage Harlan. It was her, the woman from the hallway. Gage felt the blood drain from his face so fast it made him dizzy. He grabbed his lawyer's arm. "Vail," Gage hissed, his voice trembling. "Vail, we have a problem." "Quiet," Vail whispered. "She's reading the docket." "The Honorable Judge Helena Caldwell presiding," the bailiff announced. Vail froze. He whipped his head around to look at Gage. "Marshal, did he say Caldwell?" "Who is she?" Gage whispered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "She's not a local judge," Vail hissed, panic entering his eyes. "She's from the federal circuit. The Department of Justice sends her in when they think the local judges are compromised. They call her the guillotine. Gage, why is she looking at you like that? Judge Caldwell arranged her papers. She didn't bang the gavel. She didn't need to. The silence in the room was absolute. Before we begin the matter of the United States versus Harlan and others, Judge Caldwell said, her voice amplified by the microphone, calm and deadly, I have a preliminary housekeeping matter to address regarding the conduct of the defendant. She reached under the bench. Gage stopped breathing. Slowly, deliberately, Judge Caldwell pulled up a bundle of fabric. It was a denim jacket. The left sleeve was torn almost completely off, hanging by jagged threads. She laid the torn jacket on the bench, right next to her gavel. It looked like a corpse on an autopsy table. Mr. Vale, Judge Caldwell said, her eyes never leaving Gage's face. Vale stood up, his legs shaking. Yes, Your Honor. Your client, she said, gesturing to the jacket, seems to have a difficulty with impulse control. Moments ago, in the hallway of this courthouse, he assaulted a woman who he believed was blocking his path. He tore this jacket from her body. He called her a welfare queen. He told her to get out of his face. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The reporters in the front row began furiously typing on their laptops. That woman, Judge Caldwell continued, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet, was me. The silence in the courtroom was so profound you could hear the hum of the electric lights. Gage Harlan wanted to vanish. He wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He looked at the exit signs, calculating the distance, realizing he would never make it. Your Honor, Vale stammered. My client. Surely there is a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Counselor. Judge Caldwell cut him off. I was carrying the unredacted files for this case. Files I requested personally because I had reason to believe evidence was being tampered with by the local precinct. When your client assaulted me, he knocked those files to the floor. I believe he referred to them as trash. She picked up a file from her desk. This trash contains the internal communications logs between Sergeant Harlan and the district attorney's office. Gage's heart hammered against his ribs. The logs, the text messages where he bragged about planting the drug money, he thought those had been deleted. Now Judge Caldwell leaned forward. Typically, a judge would recuse herself in a situation where she has become a victim of the defendant. It creates a conflict of interest. Vale let out a breath of relief. Yes, Your Honor. We move for immediate recusal and a mistrial. Clearly, you cannot be impartial. Judge Caldwell smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a trapped rabbit. I anticipated that motion, Mr. Vale. However, under Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 25, and given the special mandate granted to me by the Supreme Court for this specific corruption inquiry, I am not merely presiding as a judge. I am presiding as a special master of inquiry. She opened the file. Furthermore, the assault in the hallway was captured on the courthouse security cameras as well as the body camera of the bailiff who was escorting me. A bailiff Sergeant Harlan failed to notice because he was too busy admiring his own reflection. She pointed to a screen mounted on the wall. Play it! The giant LCD screen flickered to life. The grainy but clear footage showed the hallway. It showed Gage strutting. It showed him collide with her. It showed the shove, the rip, the sneer. The audio was crisp. I don't take orders from welfare queens. The courtroom erupted. People were booing. The mother of the victim in the back row screamed, That's him. That's what he is. Judge Caldwell banged her gavel once, a sharp crack that silenced the room. Motion for recusal denied, she ruled. This incident speaks directly to the defendant's character, his volatility, and his sense of impunity, all of which are central to the charges of police brutality and corruption facing this court. The jacket stays on the bench as Exhibit A. She looked at Gage. He was slumped in his chair, sweating through his expensive suit. Now, Sergeant Harlan, she said, please stand up. Gage couldn't move. His legs felt like lead. Stand up, she commanded, her voice like a whip crack. Gage scrambled to his feet, trembling. You told me to see how far I get if I sued you, she said softly. We aren't going to sue you, Sergeant. We are going to try you. And since you seem to enjoy tearing things apart, let's see what happens when we tear apart your alibi. She turned to the prosecutor, a young, sharp-looking woman named Lena Brooks, who looked like she had just won the lottery. Miss Brooks, the judge said, call your first witness, and I believe you have some new evidence regarding the corrupted dashcam footage. Lena Brooks stood up, smiling. Yes, Your Honor. It turns out the footage wasn't corrupted. It was just hidden. And, thanks to the files you recovered from the trash in the hallway, we found the encryption key. Gage looked at his partner, Reyes. Reyes wasn't looking at him. Reyes was looking at the floor, inching his chair away from Gage. The ship was sinking, and the rats were already swimming. Wait, Gage whispered to Vale. Do something. Vale began packing his briefcase. I can't do anything, Gage. You assaulted a federal judge on tape before the trial even started. You're radioactive. I'm not losing my license for you. You can't leave me. I'm not leaving, Vale whispered back, cold and professional. But I advise you to look at the prosecutor's table. Look who just walked in. Gage looked. Walking through the gate was Officer Caleb Hayes, the rookie from Gage's unit, the kid Gage had bullied into silence for years, the kid who knew where the bodies were buried. Hayes sat down next to the prosecutor. He looked scared, but he looked determined. Judge Caldwell saw the look on Gage's face. Is there a problem, Sergeant? She asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. Gage swallowed hard. No, Your Honor. Good, she said, picking up a pen, because by the time we are done today, you are going to wish you were one. The air in the courtroom had shifted. It was no longer a trial. It was a dissection. Officer Caleb Hayes, a young rookie with a face that looked like he hadn't slept in days, sat in the witness box. His hands were shaking so badly that the plastic water cup in front of him rippled. State your name and rank for the record, Prosecutor Brooks said. Officer Caleb Hayes, badge number 4922. Gage Harlan leaned forward at the defense table. He didn't say a word, he just stared. He locked eyes with the kid, channeling every ounce of menace he had cultivated over his career on the force. It was the look that made drug dealers swallow their tongues. The look that said, "You rat, and you die." Hayes flinched, looking down at his lap. Officer Hayes, Judge Caldwell's voice cut through the air. She wasn't looking at the witness. She was looking at Gage. Is something distracting you? Hayes swallowed hard. No, Your Honor. Good, she said, her eyes narrowing behind those thick-rimmed glasses. Because if the defendant continues to attempt to intimidate a federal witness via facial expressions, I will have him shackled and blindfolded for the remainder of these proceedings. Do I make myself clear, Mr. Vale? Gage's lawyer, Preston Vale, looked like he was trying to become invisible. Crystal clear, Your Honor. Mr. Harlan, look at the wall. Gage ground his teeth, turning his head away, the veins in his neck bulging. Officer Hayes, Brooks continued, let's talk about the night of the raid on the warehouse in the meatpacking district. What happened? Hayes took a deep breath. We breached the door. Sergeant Harlan led the team. There were 3 suspects inside. They surrendered immediately, hands on heads, knees on the ground. And then Sergeant Harlan ordered me to turn off my body camera. The jury murmured. Did you? Yes, Hayes whispered. I was scared. He told me that rookies who don't listen get left behind in bad neighborhoods. And after the cameras were off, Hayes started to cry, silent tears running down his face. He went to the back room. There was a safe. He cracked it. There was cash inside. A lot of it. Bundles of hundreds. Maybe 50 grand. Did he log it into evidence? No, Hayes said. He put half in his vest. He gave a bundle to Officer Reyes. And then, Hayes paused, his voice trembling. Then he took a drop gun out of his ankle holster, a snub-nosed .38, with the serial numbers filed off. He walked over to one of the suspects, a kid named Devin Bennett. He was only 19. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped. He put the gun in Devin's hand, Hayes sobbed. He pressed his fingers against it to get prints, and then he kicked Devin in the face and told him, Congratulations, kid. You just bought a felony possession charge. Objection. Vale stood up half-heartedly. Hearsay. Overruled, Judge Caldwell said instantly. Proceed. Officer Hayes, the prosecutor said, walking over to the evidence table. Is this the gun? She held up a plastic bag containing a rusted revolver. Yes. And tell us, she said, turning to look at Gage. Why are you coming forward now? Hayes looked up. He looked at Gage, who was staring at the wall, his jaw clenched. Then he looked at Judge Caldwell, sitting high on the bench, the torn denim jacket resting next to her like a flag of war. Because, Hayes said, his voice gaining strength, yesterday in the locker room, I heard Sergeant Harlan talking on the phone. He was laughing about how he was going to get away with it. He said the system was rigged for people like him. He said judges were just politicians in robes. Hayes pointed a shaking finger at Gage. And then I saw what he did in the hallway this morning. I saw him attack her honor, and I realized if he's willing to do that to a federal judge in broad daylight, he's going to kill me if I don't speak up. He's a monster. Gage slammed his fist on the table. You lying little punk, sit down. Judge Caldwell's voice boomed. It wasn't a request. It was a thunderclap. Mr. Harlan, she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, you have already assaulted the court physically today. Do not assault it verbally. One more outburst and your bail is revoked immediately. Gage slumped back, fuming, but the damage was done. The blue wall of silence hadn't just cracked. It had shattered. By the time the defense took over, the defense was in shambles. Vale, the lawyer, looked like he was reconsidering his career choices. He leaned into Gage. Gage, listen to me, Vale whispered. We need to plead right now. I can maybe get you 15 years if you allocute. If we go to verdict, she's going to bury you under the prison. Gage looked at the jury. They looked disgusted. He looked at the judge. She looked impassive. But Gage Harlan was a narcissist. He didn't see reality. He saw a challenge. He truly believed he could talk his way out of this. He had charmed internal affairs before. He had charmed juries before. He was the hammer. No, Gage said. Put me on the stand. Vale's eyes widened. Are you insane? That woman is a shark. She will eat you alive. I can handle her, Gage said, adjusting his tie. She's just an angry woman with a grudge. I'll make the jury see that she's biased. I'll play the hard job, bad streets card. They love that. Gage, don't. I'm taking the stand. Moments later, Gage Harlan sat in the witness box. He sat tall, chest out, giving the jury his best weary protector of the city look. For the first part, under his own lawyer's questioning, he did well. He talked about the dangers of the job, the split-second decisions, the stress. He almost looked sympathetic. Then Prosecutor Brooks stood up to cross-examine. But before she could speak, Judge Caldwell raised a hand. Miss Brooks, the judge said, I will be conducting the inquiry from this point forward. The room gasped. This was highly irregular, but as a special master of inquiry, fully within her rights. Judge Caldwell stood up. She didn't stay behind the bench. She walked down the steps, her black robes billowing. She walked until she was standing right in front of the witness box, eye to eye with Gage Harlan. She wasn't holding a notepad. She was holding the torn denim sleeve. Sergeant Harlan, she began, her voice conversational, almost polite. You testified just now that you are a man of extreme discipline. Is that correct? Gage smiled, a charming, practiced smile. Yes, Your Honor. You have to be in my line of work. And you testified that you only use force when you feel an imminent threat to your safety or the safety of others, correct? Absolutely. Officer safety is paramount. Judge Caldwell held up the sleeve. This morning, in the hallway, when you tore this jacket from my body, did you feel threatened? Gage hesitated. The trap was obvious, but he had to answer. I felt obstructed, Your Honor. It was a tense morning. Obstructed, she repeated. I am 5'4". You are 6'4". I was holding papers. You were holding a latte. Did I have a weapon? No. Did I verbally threaten you? You were rude. Rude, Judge Caldwell said, stepping closer. So, in your world, Sergeant, rudeness is a capital offense, punishable by physical assault. I didn't assault you, Gage blustered. I moved you. With enough force to rip industrial-grade denim, she countered. Let's talk about Devin Bennett, the 19-year-old boy you framed. Officer Hayes said you kicked him in the face while he was handcuffed. Did Devin Bennett threaten you? Hayes is a liar, Gage spat. The kid was resisting. Resisting? Judge Caldwell turned to the screen. Exhibit C, the medical report. An image appeared on the screen. A young man's face, swollen, purple, unrecognizable. Devin Bennett had a fractured orbital socket and a broken jaw, Judge Caldwell read. The medical examiner stated the force required to cause this injury is equivalent to being hit with a baseball bat or a steel-toed boot. She turned back to Gage. You wear steel-toed boots, don't you, Sergeant? Gage shifted his feet under the stand. Standard issue. You like to dominate, don't you, Mr. Harlan? She was relentless now, her voice rising. You like to make people feel small. You like to remind them that you have the badge and they have nothing. I protect this city, Gage yelled, his composure slipping. You people sit in your ivory towers judging us. You don't know what it's like out there, the animals I deal with. Animals? Judge Caldwell interrupted, her voice ice cold. Is that what I was this morning? An animal blocking your path? You were in my way, Gage roared, standing up in the witness box, forgetting where he was. You were just some nobody standing in my way. I am the law. I don't move for people. People move for me. Silence. Absolute ringing silence. Gage froze. He realized what he had just screamed. He realized he was standing up, leaning over the railing, his face twisted in rage. He looked at the jury. They were recoiling, looking at him with pure fear. He looked at his lawyer. Vale had his face buried in his hands. Judge Caldwell didn't flinch. She stood her ground, looking up at him with an expression of utter calm. Thank you, Sergeant, she said softly. You have just proved the prosecution's entire case. You may sit down. Gage slumped into his chair, defeated. The energy had left him. He knew it was over, but Judge Caldwell wasn't done. The jury will disregard the defendant's outburst, she said, returning to the bench. However, before we proceed to closing arguments, there is one final piece of evidence from the files the defendant so kindly helped me sort in the hallway. She opened a red folder. While reviewing the decrypted phone logs obtained from Sergeant Harlan's device, we found a recurring contact, a number listed only as the architect. Gage's head snapped up. His eyes went wide with genuine terror. For the first time, he wasn't scared of jail. He was scared of them. No, Gage whispered. Don't read that. The texts date back years, Judge Caldwell continued. They detail payments not just from drug busts, but payments to a specific offshore account. Payments made to ensure that certain investigations into the city council's zoning reallocations were diverted. The courtroom murmured. This wasn't just police brutality anymore. This was political corruption. Sergeant Harlan, Judge Caldwell looked down. It appears you aren't just a bully. You are a bagman. You were planting drugs on residents of low-income housing blocks to get them evicted, weren't you? So the developers could buy the land cheap. I plead the fifth, Gage screamed. I plead the fifth. You already waived your Fifth Amendment rights when you took the stand, Judge Caldwell said ruthlessly. Sit down. She turned to the bailiff. Secure the doors. No one leaves. Then she looked at the back of the courtroom. Sitting in the last row, trying to look inconspicuous, was a man in a gray suit. He had been there all day. Judge Caldwell pointed a long black-sleeved finger at the man. Arrest that man. The man jumped up to run, but 3 bailiffs were on him in seconds. They tackled him to the ground. Who is that? Someone shouted. That, Judge Caldwell said, is Councilman Victor Lang, the man Sergeant Harlan refers to as the architect in his text, the man who ordered the hit on Devin Bennett because the boy's family refused to sell their grocery store. The twist hit the room like a bomb. Gage Harlan wasn't the mastermind. He was the muscle. He had destroyed lives, framed kids, and terrorized a neighborhood, all to help a politician build a shopping mall. Gage looked at Lang being cuffed. He looked at the judge. He realized the scope of her investigation. She hadn't just come for him. She had used him as the bait to catch the whale. She had let him act arrogant. She had let him think he was in control. She had even let him tear her jacket, all to get him into this room with those files to expose the whole rot. The jury deliberation room door remained shut for a short time. In the world of high-stakes federal criminal trials, that was a heartbeat. It was a terrifyingly short amount of time. It meant there was no debate. It meant there was no holdout juror arguing for leniency. It meant the evidence was so overwhelming, so grotesque, that 12 strangers had looked at each other and agreed immediately. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had transformed from a legal proceeding into a funeral wake. The air was thick, heavy, and silent. Sergeant Gage Harlan sat at the defense table, but he was no longer the hammer. The adrenaline of his earlier outburst had drained away, leaving behind a cold, shaking dread. He stared at the mahogany table, tracing the grain of the wood with a trembling finger. For the first time in his career, he wasn't thinking about how to spin the story. He wasn't thinking about which favor to call in. He was thinking about the walls of a cell. His lawyer, Preston Vale, was packing his briefcase. It was a subtle motion, but Gage caught it. Vale was organizing his pens, closing his files, checking his watch. He was already checking out. He knew the ship had sunk. He was just waiting for the official time of death so he could leave. "They're coming back too fast, aren't they?" Gage whispered, his voice cracking. He sounded like a child asking if the monsters were real. Vale didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the courtroom door. "In federal court, fast is bad, Gage. Fast is a landslide. If they had questions, they would have sent a note. There are no notes." Gage felt the bile rise in his throat. He looked back at the gallery. The seats were full, but the faces had changed. The supporters, the other cops from the precinct who had filled the front rows earlier that morning, were gone. They had vanished the moment the text messages about the architect were read. The blue wall had not only crumbled, it had evaporated. In their place remained the people Gage had spent a career tormenting, the mothers of sons he had locked up, the shopkeepers he had shaken down, and right in the center, staring at him with eyes that burned like coals, was Mrs. Hayes, the mother of the boy whose face Gage had smashed into the concrete. "All rise." The bailiff's voice was sharper this time, less ceremonial, more final. The door to the jury room opened. The 12 jurors filed out. They walked with a solemn, heavy gait. Not a single one of them looked at the defense table. They looked at the floor. They looked at the judge. They looked at the flag. But they refused to look at Gage Harlan. Judge Caldwell sat high on the bench. She had not moved during the recess. The torn denim jacket was still there, sitting next to her gavel like a silent witness. She watched the jury take their seats, her face a mask of stone. "Mr. Foreman," Judge Caldwell said. Her voice was calm, contrasting with the hurricane of tension in the room. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman, a retired mechanic with calloused hands and a stern face, stood up. He held the verdict sheet with both hands to keep it from shaking. "We have, Your Honor." "Publish the verdict." Gage Harlan stopped breathing. The world narrowed down to the foreman's mouth. "In the matter of the United States versus Gage Harlan," the foreman began, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "On count 1, racketeering and corruption under the RICO Act, we find the defendant guilty." Gage flinched as if he'd been slapped. A gasp rippled through the gallery, but it wasn't shock. It was relief. On count 2, obstruction of justice, guilty. On count 3, perjury, guilty. On count 4, deprivation of rights, under color of law, guilty. The guilties kept coming like hammer blows, like nails in a coffin. Count 5, count 6, count 7, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, aggravated assault, and on count 8, the foreman paused, looking up for the first time, looking directly at the weeping mother in the third row. Conspiracy to commit murder regarding the attack on Devin Bennett. We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't a cheer. It was a release of years of pent-up agony. Mrs. Hayes sobbed openly, collapsing into the arms of her daughter. The sound was raw, a mixture of grief and vindication that cut through the sterile air of the court. Judge Caldwell banged the gavel. "Order!" she commanded. "There will be order in this court." She waited until the silence returned. Then she turned her gaze to the defense table. "Mr. Vale," she said, "do you wish to poll the jury?" Vale stood up slowly. He looked at Gage, then back at the judge. "No, Your Honor. The defense waives polling." Gage grabbed Vale's sleeve. "What are you doing? Fight for me. Do something." Vale pulled his arm away, disgusted. "It's unanimous on 8 counts, Gage. It's over. Sit down." Judge Caldwell adjusted her glasses. "The court accepts the verdict. Judgment of conviction is entered. Now, typically, I would set a date for sentencing weeks from now to allow for pre-sentencing reports." She paused, her eyes locking onto Gage's terrified face. "However, given the nature of the crimes, the overwhelming evidence, and the defendant's own conduct in this very building today, I find that a pre-sentencing report is unnecessary. I have heard the testimony, I have seen the evidence, and I have personally experienced the defendant's character." She opened the file in front of her. "We will proceed to sentencing immediately." Gage's heart hammered against his ribs. "Now, right now." "Miss Brooks," the judge said to the prosecutor, "the government may speak." Lena Brooks stood up. She didn't need notes. She walked to the center of the room. "Your Honor, Gage Harlan wore a badge throughout his career. For all those years, he was supposed to be the line between order and chaos. Instead, he was the chaos. He didn't just break the law. He sold it. He sold the safety of this community for cash and ego. He destroyed Devin Bennett's face and his future. He destroyed the trust this city places in its officers. The government asked for the maximum sentence." "Thank you," Judge Caldwell said. She looked past the lawyers. Mrs. Hayes, I see you in the gallery. Under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, you have the right to be heard before I pass sentence. Do you wish to speak? Mrs. Hayes stood up. She was a small woman, trembling with emotion, but she walked to the podium with a dignity that silenced the room. She gripped the wood, her knuckles white. She didn't look at the judge. She turned her body and looked directly at Gage Harlan. You laughed, she said, her voice shaking. My son told me that when you broke his jaw, you laughed. Gage looked down at the table, unable to meet her eyes. Look at me, she screamed, a sound so full of pain that the bailiffs took a step forward. Gage slowly lifted his head. He saw the tears streaming down her face. My boy wanted to be an architect, she whispered. Now he can barely speak. He has nightmares where he screams but no sound comes out. You took his voice, you took his smile. And for what? For a bonus. For a pat on the back from a crooked politician. She wiped her eyes. You called yourself the Hammer. You thought you could crush us because we were poor, because we were black, because we didn't have power. But look around you, Mr. Harlan. Look at where you are. You are in a cage now. And my son is free. She turned to the judge. Lock him away, Your Honor. Lock him away until he forgets what sunlight looks like. Judge Caldwell nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. Finally, the judge turned to Gage. Defendant Harlan, you have the right of allocution. That means you can speak before I sentence you. Do you have anything to say? Gage stood up. His legs felt like jelly. He looked around the room, looking for a friendly face, looking for an exit, looking for a miracle. There was nothing, just the cold stare of the judge and the silent judgment of the room. I was just doing my job, Gage stammered. The streets are war zones. You don't understand. I had to be tough. If I wasn't tough, people got hurt. You were the one hurting them, Judge Caldwell interrupted, her voice sharp. I made mistakes. Gage tried to pivot, his voice taking on a desperate, pleading tone. I'm sorry if anyone got hurt. I'm a good cop. I have citations. I have medals. Doesn't that count for anything? I dedicated my life to this city. Judge Caldwell listened. She waited until he trailed off, until his excuses ran dry. Then she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the high bench. Mr. Harlan, she began, her tone conversational but deadly. Do you see this jacket? She picked up the torn denim fabric again. This morning, in the hallway, you encountered a woman. You didn't see a judge. You didn't see a citizen. You saw an object. Something to be moved. Something to be discarded. She stood up, holding the jacket up for the entire court to see. You tore this jacket because you believed you were untouchable. You believed that your badge gave you the right to occupy any space you chose, and that everyone else existed only by your permission. That is not the mindset of a good cop, Mr. Harlan. That is the mindset of a tyrant. She dropped the jacket onto the bench. It landed with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot. You speak of your medals. You speak of your service. But let me tell you what I saw in the evidence today. I saw a predator. I saw a man who preyed on the vulnerable because it was easy. You didn't fight crime. You organized it. You didn't protect the weak. You sold them to the highest bidder. Judge Caldwell picked up a pen. There is a concept in the law called breach of trust. It means that when a person in power commits a crime, it is worse than when a civilian does it. Because when you commit a crime, Mr. Harlan, you murder the very idea of justice. You make people afraid of the ones they should run to for help. She looked him dead in the eye. You wanted to know if I knew who you were. You asked me in the hallway. Do you know my name? She paused for effect. Yes, I know your name, and now I am going to make sure history forgets it. She looked down at the sentencing sheet. Gage Harlan, on the count of racketeering, I sentence you to 20 years. On the count of civil rights violations, I sentence you to 10 years. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, I sentence you to 30 years. Gage's knees buckled. He grabbed the table to stay upright. 30 years, he gasped. I'll die in there. These sentences, Judge Caldwell continued, her voice rising, overpowering his plea, are to run consecutively. The math is a total of 60 years in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, she declared. You will be ineligible for parole. You will serve every single day. No! Gage screamed, the reality shattering his mind. You can't do this. This is a setup. You're biased. I want a retrial. There will be no retrial, Judge Caldwell said calmly. And there is one last thing. She pointed to his chest, to the gold shield pinned to his suit jacket, the badge he had polished every morning for his career, the source of his power, the source of his ego. Bailiff, she commanded, remove the defendant's badge. The two U.S. Marshals stepped forward. They were big men, bigger than Gage. They didn't ask nicely. One of them grabbed Gage's arms and twisted them behind his back, forcing him to bend over the defense table. Get off me! Gage shouted, struggling, kicking out. Don't touch me! The second marshal reached out. He grabbed the gold badge. He unlatched the pin. The sound of the pin clicking open was audible in the silence. The marshal pulled the badge off Gage's suit. He held it up. It caught the light of the courtroom chandeliers. Bring it here, Judge Caldwell said. The marshal walked up to the bench and placed the badge down. He placed it right next to the torn denim sleeve, the symbol of his authority and the symbol of his arrogance, side by side. You are no longer Sergeant Harlan, Judge Caldwell said, her voice final. You are inmate number 89402. You have no rank. You have no authority. You are just a man who owes a debt to society that you will spend the rest of your natural life paying. She slammed the gavel down, one final thunderous crack that signaled the end of Gage Harlan's life as he knew it. This court is adjourned. Take him away, the marshal ordered. No, no! Gage was sobbing now, a guttural, ugly sound. The fight had left him, replaced by the terrified realization of his future. Please, Judge, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about the jacket. I'll buy you a new one. Just don't do this. The marshals hauled him up. They slapped steel cuffs on his wrists, the same cuffs he had used on thousands of people. They dragged him toward the side door, the prisoner's exit. As they dragged him past the gallery, Gage looked at the faces. He saw Mrs. Hayes. She wasn't looking at him with hate anymore. She was looking at him with pity. That hurt more than the hate. He was nothing to her now. He was just trash being taken out. He looked back at the bench one last time. Judge Caldwell was standing. She had removed her glasses. She was watching him be dragged away, her expression unreadable. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like a surgeon who had just cut out a tumor, exhausted but satisfied that the patient would survive. As the heavy steel door slammed shut behind Gage, cutting off his screams, a profound silence settled over the courtroom. Judge Caldwell looked down at the bench. She picked up the badge. She looked at it for a moment, then dropped it into a metal evidence bin. Then she picked up her torn jacket. She folded the denim carefully, smoothing out the ripped fabric. She placed it into her briefcase. She looked at the gallery, gave a small, respectful nod to Mrs. Hayes, and then turned and walked into her chambers, her black robes flowing behind her. The hammer was gone, but the justice remained. Gage Harlan thought he was untouchable because he had power. But he forgot the most important rule of the jungle. You never know who you're dealing with until it's too late. He judged a book by its cover, and that book turned out to be the penal code that put him away for life. Justice isn't always swift, and it isn't always pretty. But on that hot morning in the federal courthouse, karma didn't just knock on the door, it kicked it down. If you believe that arrogance deserves to be punished and that no one is above the law, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these stories of justice with the world. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story where the bully finally gets what's coming to them. Tell me in the comments, do you think 30 years was enough for Gage Harlan, or did he deserve more? I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe and stay vigilant.